Good morning. Obviously, the 2014 session has come to an end, and we hope that this will be the end of single-party control in Minnesota. Democrats continued their old habits of taxing and spending as a solution to every problem, and what we found out is that they've driven us from a healthy recovering economy back towards deficit spending and unhealthy taxing and spending, hurting Minnesota's economy and hurting Minnesota families. They continue to take more money out of Minnesota's economy to pay for their historic increases in spending, and because of that, Minnesotans will have fewer opportunities and less opportunities for the good-paying jobs that we know that they want and need. Minnesota deserves elected officials that will respect hardworking taxpayers and leaders who look at problems facing Minnesota to develop a solution that works for our communities. Democrats have increased spending by 12%. And over $2.1 billion in tax increases last year. They reduced that a little bit, but unfortunately, one of the largest tax increases in state history. As of now, we have the third consecutive month of negative revenue forecasts. This is the first time in, I think, about 3 or 4 years. Obviously showing that they've taken Minnesota's healthy recovering economy and put us back into a kind of some question about Minnesota's future. They've shed 4,200 jobs in April with a rate of 1.5%, lagging the U.S. Rate by 1.7%. So obviously the Democrat policies of the last year and a half have not responded well, and Minnesota's economy has not responded well. So we obviously hope that Minnesotans see that these policies haven't served Minnesota well, and we hope to bring our case of really responding to Minnesotans with a positive vision will respond better to Minnesotans. So, Senator Hann.
Thank you. Well, we have seen the last 2 years of what Democrat Party rule can do in Minnesota, and what it can do is it can do a lot. Not all of it very good. We saw historic tax increases, historic spending increases. When Republicans were in the majority, we used to talk about living within our means. Let's not overspend the growth of the economy. But I think what we learned from Democrats is they cannot even live within their own budget. The budget they passed last year saw historic tax increases, historic spending increases, and then we just doubled down. We did more spending increases this year, although we did do some adjustment on the tax side. I think of all the things that we did, though, this year, the one glaring omission is that we did nothing with health care. And everyone knows that this healthcare system that was put in place last year hasn't really worked out that well. $160 million of cost. The result, about 240,000 Minnesotans having to lose their health care, go out and try to find replacement health care. We've seen increased pressure in the private markets for growing premiums. And to date, we do not know of any instance where someone who wasn't insured before is now insured. There has to be some serious re-examination of this way of solving or dealing with health care. The idea that Democrats have that if you centralize decision-making either in Washington or St. Paul and that's going to solve all the problems has proven to be a failure. There are things we can do, and we will do them. I think Republicans and majorities are going to be looking at what we can do in health care to solve some of these problems, make sure that every Minnesotan has affordable health care and every Minnesotan has opportunities and choices which are being diminished through this Obamacare regimen. So as we look ahead, I think Republicans are looking at what can we do to make sure that people are free in the economy to solve problems, that they're free to create jobs and solve the problems, not turn to St. Paul or Washington and say, you guys figure it out, just tell us what to do. That's the approach of Democrats. That's not the approach of Republicans.
I'm going to talk a little bit about education. I'm sure you're going to hear quite a bit about that from the DFL majority, talking about some of the things they did, all-day kindergarten and increasing early childhood scholarships, both good things and things that I think bipartisanly people could support. But if you look at what other things were done, you will notice that while the nation and the world continues to strengthen academic rigor, Minnesota's been going in the opposite direction under DFL control. And as we all know that Minnesota kids need and deserve a world-class education if they're going to succeed in the world economy and be prepared for the jobs of the future. Under DFL control, we've lowered the bar on teacher standards. A basic skills test that was put into place a couple of years ago has been suspended. And they've also taken actions to eliminate graduation tests for high school students. Now, as a parent with children currently still in our public schools, my kids have both been educated in Eden Prairie Public Schools, I have concerns about testing, and the governor's mentioned that as well. But I also want to know that my kids' schools measure up to other schools in the state, want to know how we're doing across the nation. I want to know that their education is as good as anywhere in the U.S. and that they are getting the best that they can. And by lowering standards, we are not doing anything to ensure that. Just a couple of facts to go along with that. Right now, from 2013, we know that 20% of high school students did not graduate in the state of Minnesota. 2 out of every 5 students in Minnesota failed to meet our academic standards in math and reading, and half of all of our students failed to meet academic standards in science. So while it's great to focus on early childhood and kindergarten, we want to get our kids off to a good start, we still have a lot of students within our K-12 system currently that we are not reaching, and that's absolutely unacceptable. Minnesota is better than that. And we need to make sure that the money that we're investing in education is getting results for those students who may be in a failing school and are not being educated to the best of their ability.
Thank you so much for coming. The unsession was really quite amazing. I'd like to talk a little bit about the funding in the transportation area, where it seems though we continue to spend on suburban metro train projects when rural Minnesota, greater Minnesota, is being shortchanged a considerable amount. Now, members, not that long ago, we've had some polling data that was actually given to us, and one of the first things on their mind, one of the first things on Minnesotans' minds were roads. Bridge repair, obviously, from the terrible tragedy we had some years ago, and we're working on that. But lots of dollars came to the metro area for metro transit, and we're still not doing what we said we were going to do, and that's take care of our roads and our potholes. Quite frankly, potholes was the #1 issue, and we don't have to talk about that to anybody in this room. If you drive to the Capitol every day, you see it. Rural Minnesota is really no different. So our roads to commerce need some work out there. And what are we doing? We're spending more money here on gardens and other projects such as trains that are simply the numbers aren't there to show that we need them. It takes an extreme amount of time to go a short distance on these trains, so we're questioning whether we're actually gaining anything here. We need to prioritize our dollars. That's what this legislature should be doing with their dollars to start with, is prioritization. And the highways and roads and bridges need more money, and the DFL fell very short on seeing to that got done. So,
Questions?
any questions?
So you kind of picked a potpourri of issues. What's the biggest fail? Is it spending, education,
Yes.
transportation?
Yes.
All of
What's
the above. All of
Yes.
the above.
Yeah.
What specifically, Senator Hann, on healthcare would you propose be done?
Well, I think that until the federal law gets changed, and we believe it will get changed because this is unworkable, we're going to have to try to find some things that we can do in Minnesota, and there are things that we can do. We're going to be meeting in the interim with some of the people in the health care industry to look at what can be done. But there are things such as making sure that people have an array of choices that they can select from if they're looking for insurance. We think there ought to be a way for people to buy insurance not just in Minnesota but across state lines. I think there are things that we can do with the governing structure of the exchange itself. They've talked about and have been given the power to limit choices even more by becoming what's called an active purchaser. We shouldn't do that. We should rescind that power and make sure that instead of restricting choices, instead of saying that we as the legislature know what the choices are for people, we ought to be saying let's open this up and make sure that everybody has an access to all the choices available and they can make decisions based on the needs of their own family. So I think that kind of a two-pronged approach. We've got to keep pushing the federal government to recognize that what it's done is a failure and that it's not going to be It's not economically feasible, it's not practical, and then at the state level, see what we can do to help people who are faced with extraordinary costs. I was looking at some data a week ago in the private insurance market, small businesses looking at increases in premiums. And I looked at an array. The lowest increase was an 11% growth in premiums, and they ranged up to 82% growth. This is the result of federal changes in policy, state changes in policy structure that drive higher costs and don't necessarily provide any better coverage. We need to find ways to offer more choices to people, and through that process, we hope lower premiums will result.
Senator Hann, specifically on healthcare, can't Democrats come back to you and say Republicans had their chance?
Well, we had our chance. We had a Democrat governor who wasn't buying any of the solutions that we were offering. So, you know, it's one thing to say, well, you had your chance, except you had a governor that vetoed everything that we wanted to do and was opposed to everything that we had in mind. So I don't think it's fair chance. But what we were talking about then when we were in majority were these very things we're talking about now, making sure people have choices. We also had a program that said if you are a low-income person and you need help buying insurance, we'll give you a grant. We'll give you a direct voucher, grant, whatever you want to call it, go to the insurance market, buy insurance. I will wager that is much, much less expensive than spending $160 million to build an exchange that doesn't work to accomplish the same purpose, which is to make sure that people of low income have the opportunity to buy insurance. Those are some of the ideas that we had in place. They were not accepted by the governor. He had in mind the exchange structure that we have today. That was the only thing that met his criteria of being acceptable. This is an ideological project being driven by people who think that government planning works and individuals are not smart enough to take care of their own family needs. We think that that needs to change.
Isn't the competition between state lines a federal issue? I mean, what does the state of Minnesota?
I think that is a state issue, and
It's a state.
a federal issue, and it does require some change. But we can. There are some states that have done some of these things. I understand that Arizona was one that tried to construct through their laws the opportunity for people to buy, at least in some way, maybe it might be limited, but in some way, policies from other states. I even think the federal law, the Obamacare law, requires that there be some multi-state options available to people, and those don't exist yet in Minnesota.
From a transportation standpoint, Senator Ingebrigtsen, you brought that up, and the Democrats have already stated that there's going to be some kind of a transportation package coming forth next session. Would you support a gas tax, or are you looking at alternative funding? I mean, do the Republicans have a plan?
You know, I'd have to look at that, Julie, but the priorities are again, you know, we have to question that. When we build a $90 million state office, Senate building to house the Senates, some senators, it's not needed here. That $90 million goes a long way, not only to transportation, but it goes a long way to pay those nurses that are taking care of our elderly, are taking care of our folks in institutions where they have to have serious attention. Gas tax is you know, it's always the answer. The answer is always, let's raise more taxes. Well, we found out what the Dayton administration did 2 years ago. They raised taxes and they said, oh, that was a little bit over the top, and now we got to reduce taxes. So they did do some reductions. However, it just seems kind of funny that in the last 2 years we're looking at a almost $6 billion increase, $6 billion increase in spending. And somewheres in there, we cannot find enough for transportation. I think it's there, Julie, I really do.
Can I make a comment on that, Julie? Just, I know that when we had the gas tax a few years ago, there was a pretty broad coalition of people that were supporting that, including a lot of the business communities, the chambers of commerce and so forth. They have been notably absent from the advocacy for higher taxes. And I think part of the reason for that is that when we passed the gas tax, there was the promise made by the Department of Transportation that they would find efficiencies within the way they administered the money and that they would get, if you will, more bang for the buck. That has not been made apparent. And I think right now the businesses who were supportive of a gas tax increase several years ago are not as sanguine about the fact that simply raising taxes results in more roads getting built. And so they're hanging back, waiting for some stronger evidence that there is going to be more efficiencies in how the department manages the money.
What House members, because the House is up, what are you going to use in those swing seats? You know, it's a little over half a dozen seats that
Right.
control is over. What do you do in those specific swing districts to win back control?
You know, obviously we're going to talk about issues that are important in those specific districts, but throughout our conversations this morning, you can hear the themes: education, transportation. We believe that Democrats, over the course of the last year and a half, have really let Minnesotans down. And at a time when they really had the opportunity to put Minnesotans first, at every opportunity or every step, they put themselves first. Senate office building, pay raises, all of the things that are going to reflect very poorly on themselves when they didn't do the things that they should have done by investing in transportation out in rural Minnesota, in investing in education in ways that allowed the local districts to spend the money in a way that was most effective in that district. Unfortunately, they really have let Minnesota down at almost every turn. Property taxes, was one of their biggest promises that they made, was they were going to reduce property taxes. When you look at the real numbers now, the Republican policies of the last 2 years actually reduced property taxes for homeowners, and property taxes as a whole have increased now because of the Democrats' policies. So unfortunately, they've broken their promise to Minnesotans at almost every step, and those are the things that we're going to talk about on the campaign trail.
How many of those seats will you win back? Are you willing to number down?
Good question, but enough to get the majority. There's a lot of seats out there that we feel are competitive.
How many? How many is a lot?
We have a potential to be certainly up in the high teens, I think. But our focus is going to be on each and every seat in those districts, running them. We've got an unbelievable slate of candidates, and we believe that those candidates and the issues in each individual district are what's going to define each race in each district. So we try not to look at it as a broad picture, but look at it in each district. And I think that we feel very good about where we are.
Does an improving economy make your argument a little harder, though?
Well, is the economy improving? 53% of Minnesotans still underemployed, meaning they're working at a job at a lower skill level and at a lower pay rate than what they're accustomed to. The highest rate of underemployment since Minnesota has tracked those statistics. Minnesota families making on average $6,000 less than what they made in 2000. Minnesota families, frankly, haven't seen the benefit of an economic recovery, and now, unfortunately, the policies that Democrats have put in place have turned the positive recovery that we've had at least neutral or maybe even negative. We've had 3 straight months of negative revenue forecasts for the first time in 2 or 3 years, 4 years. Obviously, there's a lot of uncertainty, and Minnesota's economy isn't responding to the policies the Democrats have put in place. And the reason is that Democrats didn't figure out what the problem is and then work on solving that problem. They were solving things that they wanted solved and giving themselves pay increases and building state office buildings. So unfortunately, Democrats have put forth the wrong priorities, and we're going to fix that.
One of my questions is, Republicans voted for much of the spending that went on this year. Much of the spending had bipartisan approval. I mean, when you look at the session, there were really very few issues that didn't have bipartisan approval. So how do you sort of make the case to Minnesotans, that there's going to be a different change? I mean, you don't have a transportation plan that anybody can sort of sink their teeth into. So how do you, generate outrage, or you know what I mean?
Sure. Obviously, I think you have to look at what Minnesotans feel in their own family budgets and their own pocketbooks every day. And here's just one small example. A year and a half ago, when Democrats put in place one of the largest tax increases in state history, they called it taxing the rich. Today, in an election year, they adjusted some of those taxes, and now they're calling that middle-class tax cuts. So what we need to do is watch their actions and not just their words, because their words don't match their actions. And Minnesota families know that. Minnesota families aren't feeling that economic recovery. And those are the things that we're going to talk about and talk to. Democrats did not solve the problems that average middle-class Minnesota families face in Minnesota.
Can you tell us a little bit about your tour how is this going to look? Are you guys flying, driving?
We thought about a covered wagon, but then we thought, well, maybe we should do an airplane instead, so too many bottles. So, we are flying around today. Let's see, we're going down to southern Minnesota. Is it Austin, then Luverne, Moorhead, Fargo-Moorhead, St. Cloud, Duluth. Did I catch them all? Yeah, so. And you're welcome to come along. You'd have to take your own plane, though. I think
Can't
ours is
afford
kind
it.
of small. but-
How much is this trip gonna cost, you know?
How much is it going to cost?
Yeah.
Well, it's free. I mean, no, I don't know. It's our last year our victory fund paid about $1,500. I think it's probably going to be about the same. I think we're splitting the cost between the House and the Senate. It's not public funds. No taxpayer dollars are involved.
Correct. Any other questions? Sounds great. Thank you. Thank you.